Welcome to New Rechts, or for our English listeners, New Right. Today we're going to talk about how the European Union funds NGOs to promote itself and its progressive ideas. And to talk about this important topic, I'm glad today to talk to Thomas Fazi. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
And not everybody might be familiar with you. So for people that don't know you, you're an independent researcher, writer, and journalist from Italy, from Rome actually. And today we're going to talk about a report that you wrote, that you researched, that we already discussed at New Rechts, which is for MCC Brussels, and it's called the EU's Propaganda Machine. So I'm looking forward to discussing this. But before we dive into all the content, maybe you can tell us a little bit, for people that don't know you, about yourself and your background.
Right. So I'm a writer and journalist. I'm based in Rome, as you said, and my main areas of interest traditionally have been the European Union, European integration, and economics more in general. I've always been, very critical of the EU. Interestingly, I come from the left, actually, and I still would consider myself sort of an old school leftist. I think there are not many left around, because what today passes off as the left is very different from the left used to be, even just 30 or 40 years ago, and it had when the left was much more about work and people and class than it was about wacky ideas about your gender or whatever. Which is why today I often find myself actually more in agreement on a lot of issues, whether it be the importance of national sovereignty or the anti-democratic nature of the European Union, or issues of war and peace, question, the importance of free speech. On a lot of these issues today, as an old school lefty, I often find myself much more in agreement with people on the right or with conservatives than I do with people on the left or progressives, which is how I ended up, working for MCC Brussels, which is, clearly a conservative think tank. But, we don't have to agree about everything, but, on a lot of, major issues of the day, we share a common view. For example, when it comes to, shaking up the debate about the European Union, that's something that we that I find myself very much in agreement with, and so I guess this is just part of the weird ideological realignment that that we're experiencing. Yeah,
It's a funny point. I think you see this everywhere. For example, in the Netherlands now you have I guess the biggest right-wing party, the PVV from Geert Wilders, and actually. If you look at a lot of people that vote for him nowadays, it's also a lot of people that used to come from like the old Labour Party, from the classical Labour Party. So yes, there's a weird realignment. I see it everywhere around me.
totally.
But I guess we have to do with this new reality. And I'm quite curious why specifically you also wanted to research this specific topic. Why the relation between the NGOs and the European Union? What made this something that you wanted to take the time for?
Right. So I've been writing about the European Union for a very long time, about 15 years now, as I said. There've been, countless articles and books about it. And, I thought I knew the European Union inside out. But, I guess this simply goes to show that, you never know your enemy well enough, because it was really all born out of Frank Ferretti, the director of MCC Brussels, sort of skimming through the latest EU budget, and noticing that there was kind of a voice with a fairly substantial allocation of money dedicated to the promotion of rights and values. And so he just asked me, "Look, Thomas, why don't you take a look at this, and just try to dig a bit deeper into this, and just look at what exactly is all this money actually being used for? What are these values and these rights that are being promoted?" And so, so I didn't come at it with any, a preconceived notion, really, of how this money was being used. I literally, I simply started to dig into some of these programs, and I was quite astonished myself at what I found, really, and just the the amount
Mm-hmm.
of money the European Union spends on what can only be described as propaganda. Really, we've all seen the official communication campaigns of the European Union. So, the billboards and the TV ads and the radio ads. And that's, one could argue already a questionable use of taxpayer money, but at least that's official propaganda. You know what you're looking at. But I think what a lot of these programs amount to is what I call in the report really propaganda by proxy. It really is a form of propaganda, but a propaganda that uses third parties to promote its views. So it's a much more devious form of propaganda. But yeah, I mean, we kind of stumbled upon this by accident, just out of curiosity really. Yeah.
Sometimes the greatest things actually you just stumble upon. So I think that's a fair point. I'm quite curious. You just said already, European Union is kind of an enemy. I think a lot of European citizens see the European Union as quite far away. They're like, why should I really bother? I have my own issues in my own life or in the national politics. So why do you think people actually should care about this topic?
Right. Well, I mean, to paraphrase an old saying, if you you can pretend you don't, you can not care about the European Union, but the European Union is always going to take an interest in you because the European Union today exercises a huge influence over the lives of every single European citizen. In fact, to a large degree, it influences our lives much more than national governments do, because a lot of the major decisions that affect our everyday lives today are taken in Brussels, and they're taken in Frankfurt, where the European Central Bank is. These are, it's the EU institutions that take a lot of the major decisions on economic and on economic issues, on issues that affect you as a consumer, and today even more so on issues of crucial issues of foreign policy, of security policy. I think a lot of people often don't realize how much power has been transferred to the European Union. And they don't notice because this has often happened surreptitiously. It's happened, behind the scenes. But in fact, the European Union today is a very different beast from what it used to be even just 15 years ago. Today, it's an incredibly more powerful institution than it was when it was created, but even just than it was a decade ago, and that's because of this kind of slow transfer of power, of competences from the national level to the supranational level, to the level of the European Commission. And again, what we expose in the report is simply just another side of this. It's it was pretty astonishing to see that just how much effort the supranational institutions of the EU and the European Commission, more specifically, the efforts they put into promoting their agenda, into promoting their goals, into promoting their political vision, by kind of cultivating almost a fake civil society, basically, which I think is what a lot of these programs are ultimately are for. The aim is to create a fake public opinion, a fake civil society that gives the impression there's a demand for these policies when there isn't. When it's in fact, most of these demands are not organic. They're simply promoted by the European Union itself.
All right. I think this sets up the stage a little bit of diving into the report. I think you already mentioned, there's this political agenda of the European Union, or maybe more specifically the European Commission. If you really want to understand what we're going to talk about today, maybe you can explain your view on what is actually this political agenda, because you say they're getting more power, but then someone can ask you, what do they want to achieve with this more power? What is the grand vision, so to speak?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the European Union is first and foremost, at least the way I see it, an elite institution. It's an oligarchic institution, meaning that it represents the interests of the ruling classes, basically. And of course, the interests and goals of the ruling classes can change from time to time. And they can be, but in general terms, they are economic in nature. Hence, we see the European Union generally promote, the interests of certain corporate and financial elites in place of the interests of ordinary citizens and even small and medium businesses. But they may also be ideological in nature, reflecting whatever happens to be the dominant ideology of the cultural elites at any given time. And we know what this ideology, what kind of ideology has taken hold among Western cultural elites in recent years. Very quirky ideas about identity and very questionable ideas about how societies should be organized, about what should be the kind of cultural and makeup of societies, and what should be the role of immigration in societies and so on. And so the European Union also is also a tool through which these ideologies, not only certain economic interests are promoted, but also certain ideologies are promoted. And especially insofar as what we're talking about here today, this is very much true, and it's very much kind of what I show in the report, sort of how the European Union uses public money to sort of promote certain ideologies that happen to be the ideologies of the ruling classes, even though, or at least the kind of cultural elites, even though they tend to be often very distant from the sort of prevailing cultural attitudes of ordinary people, especially in certain countries. But I would say more in general, more than anything else, the goal of the European Union, as that of any really system of power, is to promote itself, is to increase its power, basically. This is the ultimate goal of most systems of power, and the European Union is no exception. The ultimate goal of the European Union is to centralize more and more power within the institutions of the European Union itself, especially its supranational institutions, such as the European Commission, but also the European Central Bank or the European Court of Justice, at the expense of national democracy, at the expense of national sovereignty. And again, we see that a lot of this propaganda is in fact aimed precisely at this, not necessarily at promoting even specific policies and specific ideologies, but literally just at promoting just how great the European Union is, and why we should all be in favor of greater integration, i.e., greater power given to these already, highly incredibly powerful and anti-democratic institutions. So I would say that the goals may vary, throughout time, but one goal that never changes is that of acquiring more and more power for the European Union itself.
That's fair. So it's kind of instrumentalizing other values that we already talked a little bit about for the sake of power itself. Totally. What kind of values do they use? Because in your report, you write also that they use basically the guise of advancing EU and pro-EU values for its agenda. People maybe are not so familiar with this. What kind of values or buzzwords, so to speak, should people be thinking about when they want to recognize kind of what's going on?
Sure. Well, this is the tricky part, because the European Union, all these programs are officially, as I was saying, aimed at promoting EU values. And when you look at what the EU's official values are, they sound pretty innocent. They're things that most people would be in agreement with. So the official values of the European Union, as per Article 2 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, are, democracy, human rights, the rule of law. These are all things that people would generally be in agreement with, right? The problem is that the European Union has, in fact, itself always denied the very principles it officially stands for. And in fact, I would say that the very edifice of the European Union itself, which is anti-democratic by nature, is a negation, for example, of the EU's proclaimed belief in democracy. And in fact, but of course, this is part of how the EU sells itself. It uses buzz terms that most people, find fairly innocent, right? I mean, who would be against things like democracy and human rights? But the problem is that, in fact, when these are translated into policy, when they're translated into action, we see that in fact, what passes off as EU values is in fact often the promotion of specific policies, of specific ideologies. That are in fact very different from that kind of basic original understanding. But they'll take things that most people would be in agreement with, like the idea that people should not be discriminated on the basis of sexual orientation or race, or even their self-identified gender or whatever. I think most people would be in agreement that people should not be discriminated simply on the basis, for example, of the color of the skin or how they identify. But this is one thing. A very different thing is saying that everyone is racist in today's contemporary white countries, and that therefore we need sweeping changes to the way societies are organized, and so we need affirmative action, and we need a whole set of policies to undermine this kind of structural racism that supposedly exists in our societies. Just as it is very different to say that that one should impose certain languages or certain sort of behaviors that really call into question what is our fundamental understanding of human biology, and such as the imposition of certain languages, the use of certain pronouns, for example, but also for example allowing biological males to access female only spaces, etc., etc. So we can see that there's how they kind of blur the line between the protection of individual rights, which is something that most people would agree with, and instead, sort of social engineering policies that aim to kind of radically change our understanding of how our society should operate. And also, another way of looking at it is one thing is saying that people should not be people should all be treated equally, regardless of where they come from. Another thing is saying, okay, therefore, it doesn't matter what levels of immigration we have, and anyone who criticizes that is a racist. So of course, the two things are very different, right? You can criticize immigration for a lot of reasons that don't necessarily have to do with the fact that you hate certain people's skin color, obviously. So this is kind of how they promote certain policies and certain ideologies under the guise of promoting EU values. But ultimately, as I said, what I think is even worse is how under the guise of promoting EU values, they're in fact not even promoting values or specific policies. They're literally promoting the European Union itself. And so amongst the programs funded through especially this one program, which is called a SERVE program, which is the program that's officially aimed at the promotion of EU values. We find countless projects that are aimed at showing citizens the benefits of the European Union, explaining to citizens, why the European Union is important, telling citizens why we need more European integration, etc., as well as projects aimed at explaining to citizens why we have to fight Euroscepticism and why we have to fight. And why anyone that criticizes the European Union is a dangerous fascist nationalist. And so
it's kind of crazy if you think about it. And for people that don't know, SERVE, it stands for Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values. It's kind of what we were already talking about.
Yeah.
All the words that to most people sound good. I don't think you, like you said, you're not going to find many people that's going to be, oh, I don't want rights for people, or I want to take away their citizenship, or equality under the law. All these kind of basic things that we take for granted, I guess, in Europe.
Yeah.
I guess it also makes it difficult because, like, it's our job as, let's say, journalists or researchers to dive into this. But most people, they have their normal lives. They don't have a lot of time to actually deal with this. So I can imagine that for people, they just, if they hear what's going on, they will just assume it's right. But to dive into one thing you specifically said, you said about fighting skeptics of the European Union. That sounds kind of anti-democratic in a sense already, because why wouldn't you be able to be skeptic, right? There's nothing anti-democratic about having a different opinion as long as you keep it within the democratic framework, right?
Absolutely. Well, but this is the whole, you've touched on a crucial point, which is that, this isn't just I would say a very questionable use of public money, but it's, which is bad in itself. That, the fact that the European Commission is using large, volumes of public money to essentially promote itself and engage in propaganda is I think quite appalling in itself. But it's even worse when you consider the impact that this has on the on the public debate, on the democratic debate. So you can only say to live in a democracy when the public debate kind of reflects what are the kind of various ideas and sensibilities that people have in society, and they tend to be often quite varied. This is pluralism. Sure. The pluralism of the public debate is supposed to be kind of a cornerstone of democracy, but we know that we don't have that today, and that has been getting increasingly worse in recent years. We know that the debate is artificially skewed towards sort of the mainstream narrative, and this is mainly done through the sort of the media, the mainstream media. But as I show in the report, it's also done by, as I was saying earlier, kind of creating a fake civil society, which gives the impression that you have a lot of independent voices, kind of demanding certain policies or espousing certain beliefs, and it gives But what you're doing is that you're actually, boosting, you're promoting certain worldviews, which are in fact, artificially created in a sense that there's nothing behind them. Often a lot of these, when you're an NGO that's heavily, if not fully dependent on European Commission money, and most of the time you're simply promoting the kind of goals and policies of the Commission. I mean, there's nothing independent about that, and I would say that, you're not even representing really the views of anyone in civil society in many cases. I mean, when you consider that a lot of these projects and a lot of the sort of think tanks and NGOs that get money from the European Union are sort of officially committed to the goal of European federalism, so the creation of a European superstate. Now, this is a goal that most people in the European Union would not be in favor of, and in fact, we're witnessing a growing pushback against that, and yet, the critical voices receive virtually no funding from the European Union, even though this money is ultimately coming from governments, and it's coming from the taxpayers in those governments, and so at the very least, to the extent that this money is used for communication campaigns, it should at least partly reflect some of the critical views in society as well, and instead we see that there's a complete there's an incredible political bias in the way these funds are allocated, and they're almost exclusively allocated to projects and organizations that reflect the mainstream pro-EU view. And this is really it makes a travesty of democracy,
For sure. And how much money are we actually talking about? For people to have a view, of course, we see in the news a lot about US aid in America and stuff going on there. People are shocked about all the numbers. Can you give us a little bit of an overview? Of course, you also deal with this in your report of the scale of money that we're talking about.
Sure. So, I mean, the main program that's dedicated to the promotion of rights and values is the SERVE program, as we were saying, and that amounts to about almost 2 billion euros over the over the next sort of 7-year budget. So from 2021, 6-year budget from 2021 to 2027. And so it's not an insignificant amount of money. I mean, yes, compared to the overall budget, it's not huge, but in fact, that's a lot of money. I mean, when you look at some of these projects, you find, projects, I mean, that have received, 500,000, €1 million simply to, just show how, promote how great the European Union is. And this is not little money. I mean, when it's actually quite significant, and especially when you look at how much money a lot of these, for example, pro-EU federalist organizations get. A lot of these organizations have got 10, 20 million euros, maybe just over the past decade. I mean, these for the kind of work that we're talking about, this is really a lot of money, and so I would say it's quite significant. And this is just the official kind of rights and value program. The question is, as I say in the report, that I think the actual kind of propaganda budget of the European Union is actually likely to be much, much bigger than that, because there are, money is channeled to NGOs and think tanks also through other programs, which have a much bigger endowment, such as the Horizon program, which is a program that runs in the tens and tens of billions of euros. And in fact, we find that a lot of money is being channeled even to media organizations throughout Europe. I mean, I just, obviously mentioned the most egregious case, which is Euronews, which has received around 250 million euros from the European Commission over the past 10 years.
That's very, very crazy for sure. You cannot talk about any remotely kind of objective news when you get a quarter billion basically to talk about stuff like the European Union.
Yeah, I mean, that would seem obvious, right? And it's not just Euronews. I mean, it's there are, I mean, almost, virtually almost every news or major news organization in Europe has received money from the European Commission in one form or another. And in fact, this is something that we'll be looking at, a bit more in detail in an updated version of the report. So we're kind of, we're really interested in focusing on media, because I think it's a really important topic. Again, something that people have no idea about. I think most people would have no inkling that a lot of the newspapers they read every day are in fact regularly funded by the European Commission, in some cases sort of directly, but in some cases also indirectly. So for example, it emerged that in the run-up to the European elections, to the last European elections, the European Commission had given more than 100 million to one PR company. So huge amounts of money are given to these PR and advertising companies, and it's not exactly clear what they do with this money. One would imagine they're running official communication campaigns for the European Commission, but in fact, what it emerged is that one of these PR companies, a French PR company, was then subawarding money to media outlets to essentially, promote the European elections, and especially promote certain parties in the European, the kind of mainstream parties. So again, this is kind of, what you could call, covert advertising, basically, because that wasn't an official European Commission ad. It came in the form of just an ordinary journalistic piece, when in fact that was largely paid for by the Commission. So I think there's still a lot of I think we've only really touched the tip of the iceberg. I think there's I think that we need to dig much deeper into this, because I think it's probably much bigger than than we think it is, than than what we show in the report.
I think it will be important indeed to follow up on this. Let's see how over the next few years, I guess, this will develop. I guess we're seeing in the Netherlands already that this is, I guess, taking a lot of interest from a lot of people. But to go a little bit back, one of the things you touched on and you also write in the report about is censorship. You already said about that if people are critical, like yourself, of the European Union, then not only is the other side heavily promoted, which already creates an unfair advantage, of course, but you also talk about how these voices are tried to be censored by the European Commission and this whole NGO scheme. Maybe you can also explain a little bit to our viewers how this would work and what the impact of it is.
Right. Well, I mean, today the European Union and the European Commission more specifically is at the forefront of the kind of crackdown on online free speech. Mainly through a new tool called Digital Services Act, which some viewers may have already heard of, which is essentially a tool that empowers the European Commission to impose fines on social media companies that refuse to kind of align with the diktats of the European Commission in terms of what can and cannot be said online. And so it essentially it's a tool that gives the European Commission a lot of power in deciding what people can and cannot read online. So the European Union, is already at the forefront of this kind of global censorship regime. Even more so that today we have a new administration in America, which purportedly wants to empower free speech and roll back a lot of the pro-censorship measures introduced by the previous administration. So we hope they'll stick to the word on that. But in fact, it's not just through the Digital Services Act that the European Commission promotes censorship, and we find quite a few projects, for example, again, which come with the label of promoting EU values, which are in fact aimed at fighting disinformation. And this is kind of a dog whistling term that is used nowadays, essentially to basically it's to justify censorship. And this is done by taking a very expansive view of what in fact constitutes disinformation. When you look at how a lot of these projects that purportedly aim to fight disinformation are framed, you see that often the line between factually false information and information that is simply considered harmful for the public debate, or that is harmful to the European integration project, you realize just how dangerous this weaponization of anti-disinformation is. And really, it's quite clear, that they, really just in the way these projects are framed, it's quite clear that they don't even attempt to define what they consider disinformation. And so you can see that the line is incredibly blurred, between actually false information and simply information that they consider to be, essentially harmful to certain minorities, harmful to certain social groups, or even just harmful to the wider European project. And so this is just another way of how censorship today is promoted, but it's not done openly. It's done by using buzzwords that most people would agree with, which is most people would be in favor of fighting disinformation. No one's in favor of disinformation. The problem is that a lot of the disinformation today is being done by the establishment itself, and a lot of the quote unquote disinformation that is being taken down on social media and elsewhere is actually not disinformation at all. It's actually often factually true information that just happens to go against what is the mainstream narrative. I think this is kind of a very dangerous path that we've been going down for a few years now.
For sure. And I think the last important question I want to discuss with you is, let's say people hear this and are like, okay, something needs to happen about this. I don't want the European Commission with my tax-paying money to fund propaganda to basically undermine the national sovereignty or the democracy in my nation, whatever nation it might be in the European Union. I want freedom of speech to be important again. I see all these things, but then the question is at the end, what can we do about it? Both together and on an individual level. What do you think is the perspective that we can have in Europe on this very important topic?
Right. Well, I think, look, we're clearly in the middle of a very kind of tumultuous political shift. So clearly, the paradigm is shifting. I mean, it's just look at what's happening in America with the new administration. Just look at how new quote unquote populist parties or anti-establishment parties are rising across Europe. So in a way, all of these things are also signs of of just how desperate the establishment is getting. When you have to, resort to sort of massive amounts of propaganda, when you have to censor dissenting voices. These are all not signs of strength. These are signs of weakness, really. And so, in that sense, as scary as some of these, as scary as these powers may seem, and as powerful as they may seem, I think we should all realize that, in fact, these are also all signs of desperation. They're signs of the fact that, in fact, these elites are increasingly delegitimized. They have no real organic support, and which means that they could actually just crumble. I think at some point, much more easily than one may expect. So a lot of this, they put up a facade of strength and power, but in fact, when you have to resort to such insane levels of propaganda and censorship, I think you're simply showing how weak you are. And so I would say that citizens should simply continue to stand up for democracy, for freedom of speech, and not allow themselves to be bullied by these powers, and know that as scary as they may seem, they're in fact pretty weak, and that they know, I would say, that their days are counted in some respect. And so let's just continue fighting, and I think we'll see big changes are coming, and we'll get pushback from the establishment, we'll get pushback from the elites, but at the end of the day, when you're completely delegitimized, at some point, every form of power requires a degree of consensus, requires a degree of legitimacy, which is what these elites really lack. They really have no organic support. They have no organic legitimacy, and you can't hold on to power forever without consensus, without legitimacy. So I think there's also reason to be hopeful in that respect.
That's very nice. I must say it's nice to end on a hopeful note when we talk about, I guess, a lot of kind of heavy subject matter. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
Let's say that people want to follow your work. Where could they best do this?
So I'm on Substack. You can find me on Substack at thomasfazi.com. And these days you can find me on X ranting about every possible topic you can imagine. So yeah. And I regularly write for a British magazine called Unheard, and an American magazine called Compact. So you can also find my regular writings there.
Great to hear. Thank you very much. And I also really want to thank our listeners and readers if you want to make these kind of conversations possible, because we are not funded by the European Union. We are fully independent, actually, of any government funding. Then please consider going to nieuwrechts.nl and becoming a member so we can continue to do this kind of conversations and kind of work. So thank you very much. And you can also follow us on our social media, and see you in the next one.